Scarlett Maguire is a director of the polling company JL Partners and joins me now. Good morning to you, Scarlett.
Morning.
Morning. I'm fascinated by this poll suggesting a low turnout. Do you concur, and how would you address it?
It's one of the biggest questions going into this election, I think. Pollsters have been thinking this for a while. In fact, not just pollsters, I think politicians and commentators too. It's remarkable, really, the level of apathy when you talk to people. And it's apathy in sort of two different ways. It's apathy in that they're not particularly enthusiastic about either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. But it's something deeper than that as well. There's a really pervasive sense of anti-politics, which I think is something that places all around the world have been grappling with. But I think in this country got particularly worse after Partygate. Now, I can't remember the last time I sat through a focus group that was discussing politics where someone did not mention Partygate.
This is fascinating. Fascinating. I would never have guessed, Scarlett. I would never have guessed that Partygate would have been the point that politicians lost us. I would have assumed it was earlier.
Well, they were on a slippery slope. Don't get me wrong. It was not brilliant for them before. But I think the problem with Partygate is we know that when things are damaging to a brand, any brand, that's because it cuts right through. It goes to the heart of people's worries or preconceptions about what those people are like anyway. So Partygate was sort of perfectly designed for that. It was the sense that people had a hunch for quite a while, a developing hunch, that they thought, at any rate, that politicians might not have their best interests at heart, that they might be telling them to do one thing and doing another, and then add to that the sort of huge emotional toll we all went through during those lockdowns, during that pandemic, and then throw that in, and then that's how I think you get something which completely destroys a sense of trust and of fairness, I think, in the political system. I do think, though, so as I was saying, we don't know what turnout's going to be like yet. We do quite often find that don't know or none of the above, as you put it, is already the winner quite a lot of the time.
Gosh,
Especially when you ask the choice between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on a number of metrics, not just who would be best prime minister, that changes from poll to poll. But if you look, who's better, who's stronger, who's more competent, quite often it is don't know or none of the above that are the biggest winners there. So that is fascinating. But in terms of turnout, we're not sure really. So last election was actually quite high, relatively speaking, in relative history. Recent history, it was about 67%. The lowest it's come in recent history was 2001. It was just under 60%. Now, I don't think we know, looking at this, whether things will be dramatically lower than that or where it will fall. And that's part of the problem with the polls at the moment, is that we, JL Partners, are doing our absolute best to try and work out what people might do. So are all the other pollsters. But no one quite knows on this question of turnout, especially on former Conservative voters.
I've just been given a complete curveball here by one of the listeners, Julian, who points out that in Denmark, turnout at elections is between 80 and 90%, and they don't have compulsory voting. And I'm thinking, my word. I mean, that. I had no idea it was so high there, but it does make me wonder that maybe compulsory voting isn't actually required, but we have to look again at whatever the reasons are why people don't vote. I mean, when in your focus groups, oh my word, I'd love to read some of the stuff you've elicited from people. But in those focus groups, did you detect any hunger for compulsory voting, for none of the above?
No,
I'm not surprised.
It's increasingly quite the opposite. We are hearing more and more often from people, just as you alluded to in your introduction, that they're thinking they're not going to bother to vote this time, actually, and that the main parties are the same, and that our system doesn't allow for your vote to matter. So that's quite interesting. That's something. So when you go to some constituencies that are considering a vote for a smaller party, for example, if that party's got quite a strong presence there, but then they say, well, it's wasted because it will never mean anything on the national stage. And so that can put people off too.
Are you personally interested in mandatory voting? And if you are, would you favour none of the above, or do you think that could potentially be quite damaging?
It's not so much that I think it would be damaging. I think it's more that you might just end up with a lot of people who are as grumpy as they are now, with the choice facing them and going, and it resulting in none of the above. And I don't know quite how you then get around that. You just keep rerunning it.
Burn down Parliament. Burn down Parliament. Rebuild. Start again.
But then
build it in a circle for starters. Get rid of the confrontational nature of the Commons and the other places.
You say that, but in all seriousness, if the polls are right at the moment, then you might have to to reconfigure the seating plan in there because there'll be too many Labour MPs on one side if the polls are anywhere near correct at the moment. So you're sort of joking, but actually that is probably going to be a real consideration when the next Parliament starts.
Gosh, there's so much in this, Scarlett. You've really enthused the conversation, so I thank you for that.